These are Indivisible Voices, a podcast from Indivisible Eugene, and I'm your host, Kate Baker. Today we are talking about March for Our Lives, the protest that brought more than 6,000 Eugenians out in the street last weekend. And here with us to discuss that is Rio Samaniego, one of the student organizers behind that event. Welcome, Rio.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Kate.
Tell me, I'm kind of curious, student organizer is a very big label. What exactly were you doing? What was your actual role in facilitating the march?
So personally, as a student organizer, my role was actually not that large. It's something that a lot of people went to come thank me for afterwards, but we had a very strong collective. Unfortunately, Eugene, who was one of the main head honchos in decision-making and from the very start was very active in March for Our Lives, couldn't make it for an interview due to scheduling conflicts. And Benjamin, who was a godsend on logistics, just couldn't be reached. I don't have his contact information, unfortunately. But as a student organizer, I personally feel that my role was mostly a sort of like a committee member, right? My job was to help with decision making. My job was to help with, what's the route going to be? Are we going to encounter counter protesters? How are we going to react to that? Who should speak? What should we speak about? Should we allow other things to dilute the message? Should we keep it purely gun control? That sort of thing. A lot of decision making involved, which is a little bit challenging because I'm personally not a super logistical mastermind, right? I'm just a pretty average high school student who has a background in speech and debate and competitive radio commentary. So it was very interesting to kind of get my feet wet in that sense.
Well, this whole thing, as you describe it, I mean, clearly it's really elaborate. It was a very large project. And before you got involved with this, did you have special training? You must have had some kind of background to become an activist so effectively.
Honestly, I think probably the best background I've had is having a very politically active and educated father, which is not something that everybody has, I realize, but I think it is definitely something that can be compensated for through a lot of education. So just being informed and being aware of what's going on right now in the political sphere is extremely important to an activist, more than any sort of preparation, I would say. So to become an activist, you're saying just pretty much anyone can do it? It's just a matter of what? Well, as long as you're aware of what's going on around you and you're willing to put in the time and effort to learn to sort of react to things in ways that you might not immediately react, but in ways that will kind of amplify your cause, if that makes any sense, you can definitely become an activist, right? Sometimes you need to make yourself care more than you actually do, which is a really difficult thing.
Tell me how you go about doing that.
Well, as a high school student, right, it's pretty easy for me to get a lot of activist burnout, especially as somebody who's struggled with depression and stuff in the past. And in order to really psych myself up for, if I'm giving a speech or if I'm going to be talking to a wholly new group of people, or even if I'm just making decisions on a boring meeting, right, what I need to do is I need to kind of almost like getting in character when you're playing an acting role, right, if you've ever been in a production or anything. You need to kind of go beyond just yourself and imagine everything else that it's about. You need to really remember that it's something greater than the self, and it's really more about leaving a mark on history and making sure that your children, if you choose to have them, or other people's children, will live in a world that's better than the world that you live in.
Well, now, it's interesting that you should mention history, Rio, because naturally, if you've been reading any coverage, the march everywhere is being referred to as historic. And the thing I'm curious about is, did you feel historic at the time? I mean, did you feel, yes, I am changing the way the world is, or was it just more pragmatic, this is just something dirty that has to be done?
I think it's a stepping stone on the way to being an historic movement. I feel like March for Our Lives might go down as one of those huge turning points in gun control. It might also just be kind of a footnote. when something else that's bigger happens in the future. Unfortunately, there's also, I feel, a very real possibility that it just kind of fades away if we don't actually take any sort of action on it right now. And that's the main thing that we're trying to avoid, is we're trying to actually make history at some point or influence it, rather than just letting us fade away and not letting it become an historic movement.
What kind of steps are you taking to keep it from fading away? Are they further marches, or what's planned?
We need to make sure that people don't forget about that. Obviously, right, 6,000 people rallying in Eugene doesn't seem like something that people will forget until you realize how quickly people tend to forget things like on a historic level. Like, people don't remember too much about the 1990s, you know, like what were the big, huge activist movements then. I wasn't born, obviously, so I don't remember, but people probably don't remember too many of the ones that didn't turn into big movements, right? They might remember, you know, the Christian right was kind of doing their rising thing still. Or you might remember, you know, other certain movements, but you don't remember every little thing. So what we really need to do is we need to mobilize voters so that it's reflected in the politics, because the politics will remain. And we also need to make sure that the issue remains in people's minds. So even if they do forget about this particular march, we'll still have that movement growing and swelling, and then we'll lead up to a bigger event, as I was saying previously. And then that's the main thing, I think, that will keep this from fading away, if we do other bigger things in the future.
Would you say maybe the main result of Saturday's march was just getting the word out? I mean, just more of a matter of raising awareness than any actual concrete thing?
I would absolutely say that. I would say that March for Our Lives was definitely about grabbing the public's attention. And in that regard, I would say that March for Our Lives was extremely successful. We had all sorts of news coverage from both left and right wing. We got so popular that right-wing conspiracy theorists had to try to defraud us. We had like over 500,000 people marching on DC. It was like 800,000, I think, was the official number. So any time that happens, right in the shadow of the nation's capital, not only are we raising awareness for the public, but we're also making sure that the congressmen realize that this is a serious social movement that they're going to have to reckon with, or at least put that idea into their heads.
So what's the next action that your group is going to be taking or supporting?
Right now, we have a couple things lined up. Like I mentioned, Ben, who has my contact info, but I don't have his, is interested in having me help him organize a couple more events down the line mainly in May and June. I am currently working with local politicians to make sure that change happens at the local level, because I think that that's the most important thing that youth can do and that citizens in general can do, rather than necessarily waiting for midterm elections or waiting for the presidential elections. Obviously, activist groups, I think, need to be taking direct action in some sort of way, whether that is sit-ins, whether that's making a big, public commotion about it, whether it's not letting it die out and then recruiting and waiting for that bigger moment, like I said. We really just need to, I think, wait and see to kind of follow the Parkland students' lead. Because as much as people say, it's a student organizer thing, like we are following the Parkland students on this. David Hogg, Emma Gonzalez, Samantha Fuentes, all extremely important leaders in the movement. We need to kind of follow their lead, because this is their movement, right? This is the Parkland kids. This is not just students worldwide, although students are taking a lot of initiative that's priorly pretty much unseen. We need to make sure that we don't do anything that's going to counter that, because they're the main thing that's going to grab people's attention.
What would you say is the best way for non-students to support this movement?
I would say that probably the best way for a non-student to support this movement is to either show up to whatever protests are going on to help, because a lot of these high school students don't necessarily have the best resources and logistics, so to help with any of their experience that they might be able to lend, or any resources that they might be able to lend, whether that's, transportation, whether that's some more serious things, perhaps like getting permits, or helping them organize signs and, like, this is what we're going to do to barricade this area, this is what we're going to do to help control counter-protesters, right? This is a very important thing that teenagers don't really know how to do. Like, none of us have really...
Well, it sounds like you're learning fast.
Well, none of us have really done this before, right? So this is just my first time, and I've only been an activist for about, 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a very daunting thing, and having a lot of help from the old guard is very important, I feel, for students to actually lead the charge, right? Because if we just lead the charge and we don't know what we're doing and we somehow manage to fail at getting, security properly done, then we have a lot of people in some pretty serious danger, perhaps. Armed counter-protesters are no joke.
Right.
We need to take that very seriously. So I think that the old guard can definitely help a lot by helping us with whatever experience they can lend.
Right. Well, Rio, thank you very much for your time. And before we wrap this up, is there any parting thoughts you would like to express to people who are listening?
I think one of the most important things to remember after March for Our Lives is that it's really just to show that anybody can get involved in democracy. You don't even need to be voting age to take these sorts of direct action. You can let the government know what you think and how you will be voting in the next election as soon as you're able, regardless of what your age is. Like 9-year-olds spoke at the event in D.C. So I think it's really important, if you're feeling discouraged for whatever reason, to realize that you have a voice in American democracy and that March for Our Lives and similar movements will allow you to have an outlet for that voice. Whether or not you choose to use it, rather, is up to you. So you can make that next step and make the change, or you can just sit back.
Well put. Well put, Rio. And thank you again for taking time out to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you.
You have been listening to Indivisible Voices, produced by Kate Baker and engineered by John Kimball and Lynn Woolrich. Music composed by Domi Stauber. For more information on this and other topics, visit our Facebook page or our website at www.indivisibleeugene.org.